Hey everybody, welcome to the Saturday stream. I hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. I know I did. And hope everybody had a nice, frugal Black Friday. I know there's a lot of deals floating around out there, so hopefully you didn't break the bank. Didn't have a stream on Wednesday because of the holiday. I think I put that out there, so sorry if you thought that there was going to be a stream. But I mean, it was, Thanksgiving, so decided not to. Today we're gonna try some different stuff. I'm gonna start working on the Deathwing for my Adepticon army. So I'm gonna be trying to do some Deathwing and do some of my Mordian stuff, kind of alternate between the two, so I don't get burned down on any one thing. I had planned on painting one of the new vehicles that I got for the Mordians. Because I spent a couple hours before the stream assembling this thing, which is a Vulture gunship for the Imperial Guard. It's a really, really cool flyer from Forge World. Just based on the Valkyrie chassis. It's just like some parts swaps from Forge World. But I got all the way done building the kit and ready to put together the canopy, and lo and behold, all I got were the little canopy frame bits and no canopy bits. Houndstooth Minis, thanks for that, host. Appreciate you. So I tried to find one online, looking around all the bit stores, and conveniently they were all sold out across the board, even all the ones in the UK. And the only one I could find was on eBay from a seller in Canada. So that ended up probably being the fastest way to get a hold of one. And I only had to spend like $10, so it wasn't too bad. I was just a little frustrated because I was really excited about getting to paint this thing. And it came with no canopy bit, so I'm a little frustrated by that. But it'll get done, because I was really worried that that wouldn't even get to me in the mail on time, and I would have to retool the Mordian list for the SoCal Long War doubles, because the Vulture gunship is kind of a pretty big chunk of those points. So I got it. It's fine. I just won't be able to paint it until the second week of December, when that bit gets in the mail. So it could get here faster. And if that's the case, then great. If not, then I know when to expect it. And I have other stuff that I can still paint while we're waiting, because I figured out the kind of paint by numbers recipe for what all of our dedicated transports are going to look like for the Mordians. So I've got our painted Talrox right here with our really cool Mordian camo lines. Kind of hold it up like that. You can see more of it. Pretty quick and easy. Tabletop tournament standard. It's got all the colors it needs. Everything's nice and clean. Got some washes on there. Got a little bit of weathering on there. A little bit of road dirt and dust. Because I want the Mordians to look in battle, but not not like they've been entrenched in a conflict for a hell of a long time. I'm not a huge fan of ultra weathered Imperial Guard stuff, especially Mordians, because Mordians are so rigidly disciplined about the regulations for the Imperial Guard and all that kind of stuff. So I can see him having some grime and some dust and stuff here and there. And the kind of tournament tray, I guess is what they call it, where you carry your minis on top of it or from table to table. I'm gonna turn that into kind of a small little display board, and that's gonna end up looking kind of like a little bit of a Imperial City, or maybe some kind of base camp, and that's gonna have some some dirt and some grass and some barbed wire and that kind of thing, and so they're gonna be a little dirty and a little dusty, but not too bad. Captain Garrow, what's up? Tigger 65 checking in too. Yeah, so today we're just gonna I cleaned up quick fast one of my Deathwing guys. I found the Deathwing Terminator squad from Dark Vengeance on eBay for really cheap, and I really love those models. They're posed really cool. They have a ton of detail that you don't really get with the multi-part kits. And so I've just got like our Deathwing veteran sergeant, you know, put up on some mounted up on some stuff for some airbrushing. And I'm just gonna be trying some different techniques, trying to get the look that I want. Because if you remember, we were doing some of our Deathwing Knights. So I've got one of our Deathwing Knights here, and I mean, this looks fine. For all intents and purposes, like it's getting there. Like, this is obviously not a finished model. There's lots of stuff that hasn't even been blocked in yet. But the more I look at it, the less happy I am with the color of their armor and the shading and the color transition on the armor. Like, it's just too washed out and too bright. So with these guys, I will probably end up finishing them at a later date, but this squad is probably going on the shelf or maybe going to get stripped for later, because I do like how they look with the cataphracti legs. I'm just not a fan of how this armor came out. I want more color transition there, and it needs to be a little bit toned down and more like dark bone than like just really bleached white. I think that's kind of what washed it out, is I went a little bit too bright with it, and there's not enough color transition there for me. So I'm just gonna try some different stuff. I'm gonna try painting them in sub-assemblies, and you know, since I got a lot of time and there's not too many of them, I'm probably just gonna end up doing them probably like one or two at a time, instead of trying to do them all as a squad, so that I can focus more intently on getting the execution down and the details and all that kind of stuff. So that way, you know, I can look at a model and know that it'll take me, you know, 3 or 4 hours to finish, and just like have it be done perfectly, rather than having like a whole squad that I have to do over a series of days, and maybe not end up being the look that I want for this army. Because I mean, this is going to be the representation of my painting skill and prowess at Adepticon, which is the biggest wargaming convention, and there's going to be a lot of like really good painters there in those tournaments. So I definitely want it to be looking its best. Couple of other things. I'm actually going to be using some sideboard bases. I think we've shown them on stream before, but I've got one here. This is one of our sideboard Lion Ruins, Lion Temple Ruins bases that I got for my Terminators. So all my Deathwing guys are going to be on these. But the other day, I bought some new Elric bases. If you didn't know, Elric came out with a brand new line of bases recently. It's called the Fleur de Lis Temple Ruins. You can go on his website and check those out. I'm sure the bot will propagate the Elric Hobbies URL a couple of times throughout the stream. But yeah, they look amazing. They look really cool. I know they're called the like Fleur de Lis, but that symbol isn't like everywhere. It's very minimalistic on there. So if you're worried that those bases would only ever go with like Sisters of Battle or something, like, don't worry about that. They're just really cool looking, like ruined temple bases, like ruined Gothic architecture stuff. And I ordered some. I don't know what I'm going to use them for yet, but I do like how they look. I ordered a flyer base, so I will probably end up using that for my Dark Angels flyer. I got a Xiphon flyer in the mail today, along with the Vulture gunship. And luckily, I have parts left over from my Stormhawk Interceptor, so I have that clear canopy bit that'll fit onto the Xiphon, so I don't have to worry about that, you know, like finding that somewhere else. So that's nice. And I'll end up painting that Xiphon like Dark Angels, probably. I don't know if I'm going to take that to the tournament or not. It depends on what the Codex holds between now and Adepticon. And it also depends on kind of what my partner is doing for their half of the Dark Angels, because depending on what they want to bring, the Xiphon could end up being like too strong, because the Long War Doubles is kind of supposed to be like a gentleman's tournament. You're not supposed to bring anything like crazy OP if you want a good score. So it just kind of depends. So right now I have all my Deathwing guys lined out. I know I'm gonna bring those. But to fill up the other portion of my points, it's still a toss up between the Redemptor Dreadnought and the Xiphon Flyer. So I guess we'll just kind of have to play it by ear and figure out which one of those. So as long as I get the Deathwing guys finished, it won't take me very long to either paint one Flyer or one Redemptor Dreadnought. So yeah, I think it went up a little bit, but it's not too bad. There was points, there was wiggle room in my points, and I think costs for Terminators went down, so it even widens that wiggle room a little bit. We'll just have to see what comes out with the Dark Angels Codex, because the Dark Angels were not listed specifically in the chapter approved images that came out the other day. I'm sure you've seen them on the internet. They've been posted by like Spiky Bits and on the subreddits. A lot of the updated point costs for things that have not gotten a codex yet will be in chapter approved. And Dark Angels and Blood Angels were not in there because they're getting a codex soon. So we'll see what the codex holds. And then I'll probably have to retool. But even with any kind of like major points restructuring or anything like that, I'm pretty sure that the 2 squads of Terminators I have will still easily fit into the 1,000 points with Belial and then something thrown on there. So I'm not really worried about it. I also ordered some stuff from Ellerx when I bought those bases. I got some different paints. You know that I like to use the Stynylrez primers. Well, Stynylrez makes like I think 6 other colors of primer besides just black and white. They also have gray. There's a red brown. There's a flesh tone. There's a dark blue, and there's like a gray blue. There's also some reds and yellows and metallics. I think there's 6 or 7 or 8 different colors they make of just Stynylrez primer. So I got the red brown because it's similar in color to our Beastie Brown, which is what I like to use for the undercoat of our Deathwing stuff. So if that's the case, that'll cut out a lot of time for painting these. So I'm looking forward to it. Alright. So I think it is time get to work on Deathwing guy. Let's get the compressor spinning up. Run a teensy little bit of cleaner through our brush just to make sure there's no stuff in there. We will get to work. Yeah. So yeah, I was painted that Tarak yesterday. It didn't take very long. I think we were talking about it on a Kenny stream. After I primered it, I just kind of let the primer sit there for a few hours while I took a kind of a food break and started watching Kenny's stream as I was painting. And I mean, like, it really, like, literally took me, like, start to finish, like, 30 minutes, maybe a little less. Which is why I like painting vehicles with the airbrush and with camo. Because it's a really, really easy way to make your models look really cool without doing a whole hell of a lot of work. Because if your models are all, like, just kind of like one paint color, you have to do a whole lot more. Like, there's all the edge highlights and, you know, doing all that extra stuff that you just don't really ever have to do with camo, because the camo is enough color and enough like contrast and light and dark pop-in that you don't really need to do all that extra effort, other than maybe like some dry brushing here or there. So yeah, it's just primed it black, and then it was just like 3 different colors sprayed in these like alternating lines. Just to kind of break up the lines of the vehicle like camo is supposed to do. And then, you know, you just block in some metallics here and there, like the treads and the grill and the gun mounts and stuff like that, and give it a little bit of a wash and give it some dry brush of some road dust, and it looks good. It's done. I'll have to figure out what I want to do for the Vulture, because that's an Imperial Navy. It's an Imperial Navy unit. So I don't think I'm going to paint it in the exact same colors as I would my Mordians, because the Mordians are like a self-contained regiment with all of their vehicles and equipment, whereas the Vulture gunship would be kind of like air support through the Imperial Navy, so I'll have to figure out how I want to do that. Alright, so let's get to priming. Gonna get our Steinores Black primer in here. We'll start priming. Trying to be fairly careful with these because they're just kind of like held on to these little paper clips by sticky tack. Since these Dark Vengeance models are put together with little pegs and stuff that you have to glue, I didn't want to like drill any holes and mount the paper clips with super glue because it might end up not wanting to go together good, and I don't want to have to like do a bunch of cleanup after the fact that could scratch paint. So I might end up having to kind of fiddle with these a little bit, but at least I know that when we put them together, it'll fit good. And once we get the primer on there and it's fully dry, we can kind of remount certain things and maybe just hold a bit with our fingers if we're careful. Because I do want to try to, for like these feathers and stuff, I want to see if it's possible to kind of paint the base coat and then airbrush the highlights on them, just so that I don't have to do it by hand. And so for like this guy, all his feathers and stuff are on this one piece, so because it's sub-assembly, I can probably airbrush some of that. Now the other pieces have all that kind of like feathery stuff like sculpted in certain places, so I'll just have to kind of see what I want to do. That's kind of the other thing with wanting to paint these guys one at a time, because as long as all of my colors are the same and I maintain most of the similar techniques throughout them, it doesn't really matter if like on one guy maybe like one little section of feathers isn't airbrushed, because the rest of the models just look good regardless. And I think this Sergeant is the only one with these kind of like little angel wing mount bracket things. So if those are airbrushed and they don't really show up anywhere else in the squad, that's totally fine. Mostly what I want to focus on right now though is our armor, is our base color buildup, because that's kind of what was bothering me about the other guys. And I'm also going to break away a little bit from the norm for color scheme choices for these guys. Been looking around the internet a lot for some inspiration, and I saw some stuff where there was a lot more green accents with the Deathwing Terminators than red, and I decided that I like how that looked quite a bit compared to the kind of the box art where all the bolter casings and power fists and stuff are either like bone white or dark red. And so I think I'm going to do that. And then for the Deathwing Knights, instead of having green tabards, I'm going to do those black and make everything just a little bit darker and aged. Enough primer for our base. Let's do that real quick. And at some point I'm going to need to paint up the other Deathwing true scale model that I got, because depending on what the points look like or what we want the list to look like, it can either be run as an alternate loadout for Belial, or it can be like a Deathwing Champion or a Deathwing Ancient. So depending on how I want to run him or how he'll fit into the list, he needs to be painted. So I'll probably end up doing him soon. Oop, I'm way off. Sorry about that. I need to adjust my camera so that the angle is pointed more towards where I'm comfortable holding stuff. Rinse this out. Let's see. Again, I hope everybody had kind of a good Thanksgiving. I know some people watching probably maybe not celebrate that because it's kind of an American holiday. I know the Canadians have a Thanksgiving, but it's on a different date, and I think it represents a little bit different stuff. But if you did celebrate it, I hope it was nice. It's one of the more family-oriented holidays here in the States. Alright, so if I like holding stuff up here, yeah, that's more comfortable. We'll just move that. Alright, so now we're gonna get out our white primer and do a little bit of appreciating. Because what I'm thinking I need to do is just do a lot more of the heavy lifting with our BC Brown and our skeleton bone than with skeleton bone and ivory. So I'm going to work on getting our Beastie Brown in here and making it nice and vibrant before I start targeting stuff with our skeleton bone. And then once we do the skeleton bone, I'm just going to see what it looks like from there. Because when I was doing some of that research looking at different paint schemes for the Deathwing guys, the ones that always looked a little bit more darker, like closer to a more like dirty bone color, like aged bone, kind of spoke to me a little bit more than the ones that were more pure bone, like kind of bleached bone. So I think that's kind of what I'm wanting to go for. And then for our base, this is just gonna help brighten some of this stuff up. Well, I would definitely get a nice desk, Captain Garrow. I bought this desk from IKEA, and it's a one, two, three. It's a pentagonal desk. So we've got like along like this axis. It's the long, and then it's got like a kind of a angle right here on to my right. So I have kind of a point that comes out right up here to kind of where my elbow would rest, and I have a light mounted there. And it's really deep. I think it's almost 2 feet deep, from me to there. I also have this nice metal shelf that you can get with it. So you have like a nice kind of cubby area to put paint racks underneath, and the top has a soft cork, similar to this material where it's nice and soft, has a lining glued onto it that comes with it. And I have like another lamp, and I have a bunch of minis put up there, so if they fall over on that shelf, it's not going to damage them, because it'll just be kind of like bouncing on this soft cork stuff rather than like on a hard surface where they might scratch. And then I also have a dogleg shape divider that you can get for really cheap that kind of snaps onto the edge of your desk along the back, just as a soundboard block, and it also will like block any like paint aerosolization that could happen. And it's adjustable. One other cool feature is that underneath it, on the bottom, there is this kind of mesh storage space that has a metal frame, so you can like put stuff in there and it'll like hang underneath the desk, but it's only like maybe 2 inches at most kind of stretch to it, so you're not gonna like be hitting it with your legs or anything. And I use that for storing different stuff. I would definitely get like a good desk that has a lot of utility to it, and some good lights. I got these bendable gooseneck, like three joint gooseneck lights from Office Depot, and they're LED diffused, so it's got a guard on them that diffuses the LEDs. They have 2 of those, so one here and one here, and they're bendy. And then I have just like a normal regular old lamp coming this way. And one thing that I didn't really think anything of until I actually started streaming was having some kind of throwaway material that you can have on top of your desk for like as a painting area, like a building or a painting area. And this is just like cheapo black construction paper from Amazon. So I only really ever work in kind of a 1 foot by 1 foot area, maybe a little bit like a 16 by 16 area. One, because I have to stream for you guys and keep everything in a frame, and also it's just kind of like no matter what I'm doing, I'm always either getting like drops of water or drops of paint or like paint thinner or glue, the airbrush stuff. It's all hitting this construction paper, and one, it helps keep your desk nice and clean so you don't have paint everywhere, glue spots. And 2, when you're airbrushing, the construction paper is thick enough and porous enough to when you're spraying that it's going to absorb some of that, and it helps the airbrush paint from like kind of getting into the air, because you're always kind of spraying at a downward angle, hitting this as a backing, and then when it gets too bunched, you can just throw it away. And like this desk has a ton of paint stuff on it, because before I was streaming, I was just like, nah, fuck it, whatever, it's my work desk. So this has got all sorts of paint splatter like everywhere. So if you're like wanting to get a work desk that you're wanting to be nice for a long period of time, then that might be something to look into. When I bought this desk, I knew it was going to be my workstation, and I honestly like didn't care if it got paint and stuff all over it. So, but it's also under direct lighting, it has a shine back to it, and that's really not very good for streaming. So I started using the construction paper as a matte back that's not going to reflect a bunch of light back at the camera. I think overall setup for my desk, minus the monitor and like my stream setup and stuff. So like the desk and the lamps and the shelving and stuff, I think all of it total cost me like under $200. With the desk being the most expensive part, because it was like 120 or 90 to 120. I don't remember exactly what the price of it was from IKEA. Beastie Brown. That's what I'm wanting. And I'm just going to be taking my time with this, doing thin passes with the airbrush, because I want this Beastie Brown to build up gradually and be nice and smooth, and I don't want to put it on too wet anywhere. And I want it to get into all the spaces, because I want the Beastie Brown to act as my shadow color for the rest of my bone armor. I don't want to completely knock out our pre-shade, so where the brown is directly over the black primer, it's going to be a little bit darker, and where the brown is over our white primer, it's going to be a little bit brighter. But I do want a nice solid coat of this Beastie Brown. I'm just making sure it's not like too thin anywhere. I don't want it to look splotchy, and I want it to get into all the nooks and crannies. We paint. Oh, we're working on a Deathwing guy. I'm just trying out some a different approach than how I painted the other Deathwing guys, because my Deathwing Knights. Oh, there's a fucking hair or a fiber in there. Get out of there. The Deathwing Knights, their armor, the tone of their armor didn't come out really the way that I had in my head, and I'm not happy with it. So I'm trying a different technique, a different approach to doing their bone armor on this guy. And I'm doing one at a time in the off chance that I might end up having to strip it. Rinse that out. Let that set up a little bit. Just add some flow improver in there so it's going on a little wet. And I want to make sure it's fully dry before I go on to the next color. Hey, what's up, Spec? So what I'm kind of talking about is, if you look at one of our Deathwing Knights here, we started off doing something very similar, which was to give them a full undercoat of Beastie Brown, but in trying to brighten up those colors with skeleton bone and then ivory, I washed, like, I blocked almost all of that out. And even with the wash darkening things down, you can barely tell that I undercoated with Beastie Brown. And so there's not a whole lot of color transition, and the color looks really washed out, and that's not what I want. So while these, like, they look fine, like the armor looks nice and clean, it's got a bone color to it, it's just it didn't come out the way I wanted it to. I wanted it to come out more aged, and I wanted it to come out with more color transition between the shadows and the brightness on the peaks. And that's why I'm kind of like going back to square one a little bit with this workout, because it kind of happened with Belial too. Like if we look at Belial, a very similar thing happened with him, where his armor, the bright bone color, kind of washed everything else out, and I actually had to go back in with a brush and kind of manually cut back in the shadows with pure Beastie Brown, and that kind of fixed him. I think he looks fine, and he looks nice, and he's got some really dark, like underneath the shoulder pads and stuff where that stuff is blocked back in. It looks good, but the Deathwing Knights didn't really come out the way that I had hoped. So wanted to kind of take a second whack at it. Hey, what's up, JP Gray? How's it going, man? It was your birthday yesterday, right? So happy birthday, belated birthday, I suppose. I think I saw it on Facebook like right before I was going to bed, and I forgot to say anything. Or is it today? Or did I get the notification after midnight? I'm gonna run some cleaner through this thing. It's got some brown built up in there. Clean out the tip of our needle here with our shitty brush with some cleaner on it. Oh shit. Well, happy belated birthday, homie. Alright, let's find our skeleton bone. So our paint likes to hide on us. Or did I put it back on our rack? I think I did. Yeah. So let's see. So I have Bone White from Vallejo. And I've got, so let's see, I got these two. So I've got Bone White from Vallejo, and then I've got Skeleton Bone from Army Painter. And if we look at them, I think our Skeleton Bone is like ever so much darker than our Bone White. So I think I'm gonna go with the Skeleton Bone. I'm gonna shake this up really good. Some paint in there. Some flow improver. These brighter colors, like, you gotta really make sure that they're nice and mixed up. We get some flow improver, some medium, because you do not want these to speckle. It's nice that I have black paper that I can spray on to see. Just gotta turn down our air a little bit here. Let's start working it on here. And this is really thin, so I'm going to be very careful and just barely let any paint out. I'm going to try to be a lot more controlled with where our Skeleton Bone color is building up. Oh, sorry, hands in the way. about like that. And we've got a lot more color transition now from our brown to our skeleton color. Just gotta keep remembering kind of like the angle is kind of set on the model. So like this section on this side of the shoulder pad is more upwards. So it's gonna sit kind of more like this rather than straight up like that. And keep in mind if you're doing sub-assemblies, that's what you need to be doing. So I think that's good for right now. And we'll come over here to our main body, kind of be doing the same thing. The Phantom Ultron, thanks for that follow. Sorry for being a little bit quiet. I'm kind of trying to focus really hard on where this paint's going down. And it's building up really slowly because I have a lot of flow improver with this paint. So I gotta make sure that I'm building up our paint very gradually so that I don't spray too much and it kind of pools with how wet it is. That's what we don't want. Trying to maintain as much trigger control as possible so we get those nice kind of color transitions like that. Is airbrushing best for basing? In my opinion, yeah, it is. Phantom Ultron. I personally just really don't like using rattle cans. I don't like, a lot of times if you're using just like basic spray paint, it's not meant for application to miniatures. I know a lot of people out there swear by like Krylon and stuff like that, but to me there is a very noticeable difference between somebody who airbrushed a model and somebody who used rattle can primer on it. But there are some companies that make spray paint base coats and primers specifically for miniatures. And those are pretty good. Like the Army Painter one is pretty okay. Games Workshop has a pretty okay one. I recommend to people who ask me like if they just aren't ready to get into airbrushing or they can't really afford it, I recommend going with spray paint from companies like Tamiya, because for whatever reason the Japanese companies like Tamiya and Mr. Hobby, the nozzles that they use on their rattle cans produce a much finer spray than the ones you'll see in the Western market, like testers and basic spray paint like Krylon and stuff like that. And those are generally really good. I've used those before, and I do like them, especially the Mr. Hobby brand rattle can paints are really good. But if I had a choice, I would probably always choose to airbrush my minis for priming and base coating and like color workups like I'm doing right now. Especially if you want really cool shade transitions like this. The best way to do it is with an airbrush. I've seen people do like pretty darn good like pre-shades and color transitions with rattle cans before if you're really careful. But it's not. They can't really compete with airbrushing. Like, you wouldn't be able to get those kinds of color transitions and lights and shadows with a rattle can. I don't think you can do it. Yeah, I would, as far as priming goes, GW actually puts out a pretty okay product. I've used their stuff before. Their colored primers are questionable. The only one I would ever really recommend is the black primer. But I've seen a lot of people make really nice well executed models with their colored base coats, like the Fang and the red and the yellow and the blue that they put out. Those rattle cans are just fine. But if you want like really cool color transitions and highlights, then the only really way to get those is to just do some like really tedious wet blending with glazes and stuff like that, or just use an airbrush. And in the long run, airbrushing is cheaper. It has a higher buy-in cost. But if you plan on being in this hobby for any period of like any long amount of time, and you end up painting more than just like a single army, it's cheaper to get yourself an airbrush and do all your work with that, because the amount of rattle cans you have to end up buying really outweighs the cost of just getting an airbrush set up and using that. I'm not painting bone on these because the little frame that these wings are on, it's gonna be painted green, so I'm not gonna airbrush those. I'm just worried about the helmet and this like central part of the body, and I did the skull too because I mean, like, while I'm here I might as well. It's really easy to do, so I don't have to paint it later. Just making sure I got all that stuff. Yeah, cool. Definitely not recommend using Games Workshop white primer. That stuff is complete garbage. And if you're like I said, if you're set on using rattle cans, like, because I know that not everybody can just afford to go out and get an airbrush set up out the gate. Like, sometimes you got to save up for it or whatever, or maybe that's just not something you ever really want to get into. It's perfectly understandable. I do recommend getting Tamiya or Mr. Hobby products. They're overall much cheaper than Games Workshop, Army Painter, any of that stuff. They're a little bit. They're going to be more expensive than, you know, your dollar store Krylon. But if you want a primer and colored base coats that are made for model kits, made for miniatures, that look really good, I would recommend Tamiya or Mr. Hobby. And if they don't sell them where you're at, you can get them online, and I guarantee you they're going to be cheaper than Army Painter and Games Workshop. Unless the website's just trying to rip people off. Yeah, the only time I've ever used the Core X White primer from Games Workshop was as like a bootsy pre-shade, like back in the day before I had an airbrush, and you just kind of like and just kind of dust the model real quick to get some of that pre-shade on there. You don't ever want to use that stuff as a coverage because it is just really bad. Okay. Okay, now I'm gonna go back to our Center as white primer, and I'm gonna put a fuck ton. Not like a literal fuck ton, just like a lot more flow improver into it, because as a white primer, this stuff is pretty good for not speckling on its own, but for what I'm about to do, I very much do not want any speckling, so I'm gonna make sure there's lots of flow improver in here. Turn our air down just a little bit. So I want control. As we're gonna come in here, we're just gonna like kind of target. Kind of like that, where we just have like a teensy little bit more. Brightness on certain points. I'm just gonna kind of like that, just to get like a little bit more of a spot highlight on some of those places. Because unlike when I did a similar technique for painting Typhus, I want this armor to end up being a little bit more clean looking. So I'm not going to leave it as dirty as far as the color palette goes. I'm going to try to go up. That's why I'm using a pure white to kind of spot these highlights. Let's see if I can get my little finger mask going on. To get some of these spots up to that. Got a little bit too antsy there. Make sure that dries out. There, I gotta get rid of it. got a lot more contrast now. It's like really bright brights and really dark darks, which is what I'm going for here. We are good there. Let's weirds this out. Oh, Stepper Steve, yeah. I did see the House Orlok stuff, which looks cool. I like the way those guys look. I might, if we haven't heard of any releases like Arbites or House Stalak before, like in the near future, that will probably be the first Necromunda stuff that I buy. Just because, like, since we don't really know what their release schedule is going to be like for how fast those guys are going to come out, if, you know, when those guys come out, there's no news of any new gangs coming out, and my choices are Escher, Goliath, or Orlok, I will probably pick the Orlok guys because I like the look of them. And I would so much rather just have plastic Arbites models, man. Like, I'm so sick of Forge World getting all this cool stuff and then just mucking it up with shitty resin. Fourth quarter 2018. Are you fucking kidding me? Jesus Christ. One gang a quarter. That is way too slow, man. That is way too slow. That's gonna kill fucking Necromunda. Guarantee you, like, there are a lot more people that want to get into Necromunda like me than there are people willing to just buy the set outright because that's all there is. That's how it is with so many other products with Games Workshop. Is people would rather wait for what they want than jump into a game system where they have to use stuff they're not passionate about. And it's probably going to make Necromunda be... They're going to sit there wondering, like, why isn't Necromunda doing well? We thought this was going to be great. Everybody was so excited. I'm like, well, it's because you're doing one fucking gang a quarter instead of, like, 3, like you should. You should have 1 a month. Alright, well, we're waiting for that to set up. Because I do want it to set up nice and good before we put a wash on it. Let's work on our base. And for this, I'm going to have to look at old Belial here and see what I did. I'm pretty sure I remember kind of the order of operations for how to paint these bases. So I'm pretty sure this was Iroko. It was, what was it? I think it was just Iroko, and then this was the skeleton bone directly over our pre-shade. I should be able to do that just fine. That's bad. It is a bad way to think of it, but you're probably right. They need to be trying to get more people into it. They need to be trying to get new people into it. Not here's some rules so that all you guys can, you know, buy a single rule book and use all your old models, because that doesn't make them money. That doesn't keep the gears turning. Want to get people buying that new hotness. Why is the lock last? They're like the coolest looking ones. I don't know. I saw how Orlok was looking, and they look a little different than the old Orloks do. And I was kind of looking at there, and I was like, man, they kind of have. I mean, if any of those, if you slap brown trench coats on those guys, that's House Delac right there. So I'm wondering what the aesthetic change is going to be like for some of these. I don't know. Are there rules for all of the factions, including Arbites, in the core rulebook right now? Because I haven't bought it. So anybody that's actually bought the new Necromunda book, like, does it have rules for everybody, or does it only have rules for some people? Where did our bone light get off to? Oh, here it is. Yeah, Papas, that might be what they're doing. I mean, I think if they were smart, they would figure out a way to have a major release or a minor release for all of their IPs each month. But I know like that's unrealistic given their manufacturing capabilities right now. I mean, there was a big debacle with the 8th edition release of Death Guard where like they had machines go down and they couldn't produce the little feeded drone scooter, whatever, the one with wheels. I don't know what it's called, but yeah, that's only coming out now, and some of the other Death Guard kits only coming out now because they had machines go down and they couldn't actually produce that stuff. Oh yeah, Titanic is supposed to be a thing too. I'm waiting for those models to come out. That should be a really easy release because you could just do like one of each. You know, you give an Imperial Warlord, an Imperial Reaver, an Imperial Warhound, maybe 2 Imperial Warhounds, and a little tiny couple of nights, and then do a chaos set and release it as a box game, and then you can have expansions. I'd be interested to see what they do with the Titans. AMC Kitana, thanks for that follow. Appreciate you. Welcome. Always love seeing new faces. If you haven't been part of the chat, I encourage you to speak up and say hi. For anybody new, we do have a channel currency that people accrue naturally just by watching the show and being active in chat, and you could use those for the ticket raffles that we do every once in a while. Right now we're just working on a base for our Terminator man that we're painting, just trying to get our order of operations down for how we want stuff to look for doing the rest of the army. Well, I say rest of the army, just like 2 squads Deathwing. So there's our base, pretty much all 90% done with just airbrushing. I mean, we still got to throw a wash on there and paint the little green leaves. But I'm not gonna paint those until we do a wash on it, because I don't want to wash the green with a dark brown. Yeah, I really hope they don't do epic with the new Titanicus. I would rather see like 32mm scale Titans, where like a fucking warlord is like 54 mil. That would be amazing. And then you have like a Knight Titan at like little shorter than 28 mil. And then like your Reaver is like right at 32. I think that would be really cool. Because then that opens up all of those models for like cool conversions for actual 40k, which would make them like way more sought after. Okay. So I think we're done airbrushing for the time being, which is good because the compressor needed a little bit of a break. So we're gonna let that set up. So we've got like our kind of ruined temple color. Then we've got our like kind of marble color, our skulls highlighted, and then we've got our charred brown for our dark earth that's kind of, you know, dusting over everything, settling in places, because it's supposed to look aged and it's a ruins. So yeah, so let that set up, and then I think we're just about ready to do a wash on our Deathwing guy. So we'll go ahead and get that ready to get mixed up. Alright, what do I need? What do I need? I need a bottle cap of some kind. I think I got it. There we go. Bottle cap. Rinse this out real quick. Just make sure there's no like vitamin water still in there. Cool. Alright, and so what I want to do is I want to try to use as much of this wash as possible. So first we're going to mix up how we want it to look for our Deathwing. And then we can darken it to have it work for our ruined base. Oh, you know what I want to do first? I almost got ahead of myself. These guys are supposed to be super clean, so what do we need to do? We need to put a gloss varnish on the armor. Almost forgot. So if I didn't, even though our army painter stuff is a fairly clean wash, he would end up coming out looking like his armor would end up coming out looking like typhus here, and that's not what we want. We don't want his armor to be dirty. We want it to be aged, but we want it to be clean. Get our glass wash going. Where's my airbrush thinner? And we've talked about this before. This serves two purposes. One is that this creates very low surface tension on the model. And what that means is that when you put liquids over it, they don't want to sit on flat surfaces. They want to slide until they have multiple surfaces to contact, which means the recessed details and little armor gaps and things like that makes the wash easier to put on very cleanly. And secondly, it protects the paint from scratching and chipping. So because we'll be doing multiple clear coats throughout the painting process, our paint will be nice and protected, and it'll last for a really long time, probably forever. I just realized I'm doing all this spraying and I didn't even turn my compressor back on, so I'm glad I have enough air to do all that. I will need to turn it on to clean it out though. And I'm going to say it every single time I use this stuff so that nobody forgets, is that if you use varnish like this gloss coat or your matte coat, clean your airbrush out with some cleaner, some actual cleaner, not just water, right after you use it, because you do not want that varnish to dry inside your airbrush. It is a royal pain in the dick to get out of there and clean your airbrush if that varnish dries down in there. That's why I always use this solvent-based airbrush thinner that just eats that stuff out of there, keeps it nice and clean. Oh, Scepter Steve, I'm glad, man. That's awesome. Speaking of Yark, is anybody else keeping up with the Hell's Reach fan production? Because a new episode came out like a week ago, and Yark makes a little cameo, and that Hell's Reach stuff is like really cool. I'm liking uh, all the stuff that guy's doing. I didn't realize this until somebody told me, but I thought the way he was doing was just like using the audiobook. And it wasn't until the last few episodes that he put out that he's actually getting people to do voice acting of those lines. So it's not just straight up one narrator saying everything. And that's really cool. So all of the characters have their own voice talent now, and the production quality is getting better and better each time. And it's really cool. I can't, like, honestly, I can't wait until he's like finished with it, and then he can like go back and compile the entire thing and edit it into a single cut, like a feature film, and like learn from each, like, because each episode he's getting better and better, but there's still little things, and he's always looking for people to kind of like give him helpful critiques on how to do stuff better. So I'm like, I really want to see when he's like done and he can go back to like all of the episodes, supercut them into a movie, and clean up anything in between. Maybe like fix animation or like fix some audio mixing and stuff like that, and just watch it as a whole movie. That's gonna be so cool. Oh man, that's rough. I know it's kind of sad because like I know that if he was allowed to get like funding for it, so that he could like outsource some of the work, or like do it as a job or something, so he didn't have to keep worrying about it as a side gig. Like I'm sure that would help a lot. But is like he cannot accept any kind of money because as soon as somebody gives him money for that, even like indirectly, then Games Workshop will swoop in and like put a stop to it. Yeah. I mean, like, I'm patient enough to be able to, kind of play the long game and wait for it, because I would rather him finish it at his own pace than, like, keep trying to, like, meet demand and then, like, kill himself doing it and just, like, have it not ever get finished or something. Like, that would not be very, very cool with me. I would rather just be patient and wait for him to do it on his own time. Apophis. Yeah, I realized a similar mistake with some of my older armies that I had, like especially with my Deathcore Krieg, man. Like I'd really like to have my Deathcore Krieg army back because it was such a large collection. Because I used to have something like 5,000 to 6,000 points of Deathcore Krieg, and um, my collection was an infantry battalion, so it was like 5,000 to 6,000 points of nothing but like grunts, and the only like vehicles or anything was just thud guns. I think I had like 20 thud guns, and I had the Hades siege drill. I had one siege drill and some units of engineers as part of that army. Um, and so it was a very, very big collection, and I kind of wish I had not gotten rid of it. Alright, so we got our wash here. We're going to start putting it over all this stuff. And trying to make sure that it doesn't pool too much on anywhere we don't want it to. Especially on our nice transitions. Just kind of lick it away a little bit. I think I got that everywhere we needed to get. Just kind of give it a little once over, make sure that it isn't pooling anywhere we don't want it to, because I want to make sure we have our nice definition in there. Let it dry. I'm trying to do this wash kind of thin on the off chance that once it's dry, I want to go like maybe a second round with maybe like a little bit darker, just to make sure that all our details are cut in nice and good. So I got this wash thinned out with some water quite a bit. Just in case. I'm trying to baby these guys a little bit. And we'll just add some dark tone to this, just a little bit. Just 3 drops. Mix this up nice and good. Just to get to that point that we want for our base. And when we start washing over this, you're going to see all that super nice detail start to appear on this base, because the sculpt on these cyborg stuff is just out of this world. All this like kind of masonry filigree that's in these ruins, and he does a lot of this same stuff on his sculpts for miniatures. All the power armor guys have all this like beautiful filigree stuff sculpted into their armor. It looks amazing. Make sure I get over everything. Kind of like so. You can start seeing all that detail coming out now. Oops. that aside. Let's look at our... I think I do want to go a little bit darker here, so let's see if I can kind of get this in there without messing anything up. Liking that a little bit better. Buff. Yeah, I mean, I got you buffs. I don't think you have to paint your stuff like a master just to enjoy this hobby. I think just the act of doing it is enough gratification on its own. Kind of set this right side up so that the wash pools the way it's supposed to. Want to make sure that it's looking its best. Making sure all of our shadows and everything are coming through the way they should be. Well, Andrew, what's up, man? How's it going? Let's see if I can kind of rinse this out so I can use this again. A lot of times what will happen is I'll forget to rinse these little, like, bottle cap things out, and then they'll get, like, dried crud and shit in them, and I have to, like, use another one, and they just end up piling up on the desk, so... If you rinse it out, you can use it again. And then you don't ever want to use one of your good metal wash tins for realistic water effects, because then you get this junk in there that's just impossible to get out. So that's done. So now we get the fun part of waiting for our washes to dry. So, while we have this little break, what would y'all like to talk about? If you want to put up whatever you're working on, snap some pictures, put it up in the chat, feel free. You can talk about some work in progress. Just kind of have a little open discussion time while we wait for this wash to dry. Yeah, Warlander. Apophis was telling me earlier that they're only doing one gang per quarter, which is really frustrating, considering the one that I want to play won't come out until fall of next year. It's really frustrating. Largosity. Well, I'm glad you're here because that's kind of what the channel is devoted to. Since I'm an by and far an airbrush painter when it comes to my own stuff, I try to take what I do and teach as best as I can. I mean, I'm no master, but I figured I'd bring my own little brand of airbrushing to you guys, because I'm kind of a lazy guy when it comes to painting, and I try to find like the easiest way to do stuff that doesn't take very much time or is like really simple to do. Whereas some of these more like super experienced guys are kind of like set in their ways and try to teach like kind of the masterclass way of doing things, and that doesn't always translate as well. I mean, like there's some guys on here that are really good at teaching stuff. Just in the short time that I've been back in the hobby, well, no, not so short a time anymore. But I got back into 40K at the beginning of 2017 this year, back in like January. And just in the January and February, when I was trying to kind of like knock the rust off from my 2-year break, I learned quite a bit from guys like Next Level Painting and Slow Fuse, because they're really, really good teachers. Now I don't paint like Jason does, like Slow Fuse. He has a different style of painting than I do. The way that I learned how to paint was based off of the aesthetic of stuff that I liked seeing. So when I would see at the time, this was like 2012. At the time, the guys I was watching was like Lester Bursley and By Painted over on YouTube, and their style of painting, that very like high contrast, like vibrant color, comic book style kind of painting really spoke to me, and that's kind of how I had really learned how to start painting and learned how to start airbrushing from. And it just so happened that when I came to Twitch during that time, like back in January, the person I ended up wanting to watch the most was Next Level, because while I don't paint exactly like him, a lot of his style speaks to me in the same way that Lester Bursley and By Painted did, and I learned a lot just about like all of the new stuff. I mean, because like you take a 2-year break from any kind of hobby, there's things that you miss, and there's evolutions in painting techniques and products and styles that you just kind of are off your radar until you come back. So I learned quite a bit in that short amount of time, and then started applying that to my own stuff. And then once I got to a point where I was just putting that stuff out to the caliber that I wanted to have, that's when I started streaming. Yeah. Trigger control is definitely a huge part of it. Like, I would say that's probably one of the most important things about airbrushing, is being very comfortable with the ins and outs of how your airbrush works and how the trigger feels and functions, and that can take some getting used to. And I don't think I've seen you say anything in the chat before, so you might be pretty new. But I've said a couple of times on stream that a really easy way to get comfortable with your airbrush without like messing up your models or getting frustrated by that is just go down to your grocery store or a convenience store or whatever, dollar store, and get you one of those like big old packs of like super cheap plastic spoons and forks and knives, like the little party combo pack you can get for $1. And just put paint on them, and just like sit there with like a plastic spoon and your airbrush, and like get used to priming, get used to doing your base coats, learn how to do your highlights, because those plastic cutlery, they have very similar shapes to what you're going to see on models, especially 40K models. You're going to have concave surfaces, you're going to have convex domed surfaces, you're going to have long flat straight edges, you're going to have big wide flat areas. You're gonna have points, you're gonna have like all that kind of stuff. You'll find those same shapes on plastic spoons, forks, and knives. And when you're done, if you get some new paint, like say you want to paint blood angels and you want to figure out how you want your reds to look, well, you can get out a plastic spoon, you can do your prime, you can get your base coat, you can work on your highlights, you can figure out how all the colors like look together before you ever put paint on a model. And you can either throw those in the trash when you're done, or you can keep them. And that way you know, like, how did these reds look? And you pull out that spoon and say, like, okay, yeah, it was these 3 or these 4, and like this is how you do it. And it's just like the most inexpensive, easy way to practice that I know of without, like ruining models. Because I know a lot of people get into airbrushing for the first time, and they're like, yeah, I've watched the videos and I've read the tutorials and I got my airbrush and my paint and a model, and I get to work, and then you fuck it up, and people get really frustrated by that. So I always recommend like working with the cheap throwaway plastic spoons before you actually put paint on a model, because that way you're not going to ruin a model, and you don't have to like strip a model a bunch of times or worry about ruining it or whatever. Yeah, plastic army men, that's another good one. Busted old space marines, yeah. If you just got like old throwaway models, you could use that too. It's just like when I was learning how to airbrush, I was working on models, and I'll tell you, I ruined a lot of models. Learning the ins and outs of the airbrushing for the first time, I actually ruined airbrushes. Like I killed 2 Grex airbrushes when I was learning how to paint for the first time with an airbrush. And when I took a break from miniatures and started doing more scale model stuff and like stuff like Gunpla and things like that, where I was doing a lot more airbrushing, it's in taking a completely different approach to things and using products that I would have never used or heard of before, because I just wasn't in that sphere of influence. There's a lot of stuff out there that people in our hobby could really use, but they just don't know about because they're kind of laser focused on products from the miniatures side of things, which is why I try to tell people about products like Tamiya and Mr. Hobby, because those don't really find their way into our little niche community very much. And they're amazing products, because if you like, I'm sure a lot of people kind of have figured it out by now, but a lot of stuff that's like marketed towards like miniatures and like wargaming and tabletop stuff is usually overpriced because it's a niche market. And if you just kind of look outside of that, like at the scale modeling side of things, you can find so many really cool things that are gonna be like look way better and be less expensive, or even like cheap by comparison, because they don't market to the same audience. Like Games Workshop and Army Painter are a pretty good example. Like they have specific branded products they market purely to their audience, and people buy it up because it's kind of like it's all they see, and so they think that's like the best out there, which is why you have Games Workshop selling like super cheap shitty hobby tools for like quadruple the price of what they're actually worth, and they aren't very good quality. Whereas you can go over to like a site like Gundam Planet, where they have Tamiya and Mr. Hobby products, and buy like objectively better set of hobby tools for what they're actually worth, like basically pennies on the dollar compared to Games Workshop products, and they'll last forever and they'll be 10 times better. But because people don't really like look into that side of things when they're trying to find stuff, they usually tend to pay more than what they need to on kind of shabby products, just because they're too focused on what's being marketed to the miniatures side of things. Yeah, that's another good point, Will Stark. Is like compared to when I started and compared to when like now, there's an amazing wealth of visual resources that people have that just weren't there before. Like pretty much all we had back when I started was there was some internet tutorials out there. It was mostly YouTube, guys like Les Bursley, Apathetic Fish, By Painted. Trying to remember some of the other ones that were back then, and most of those people aren't around anymore because I think around 2014 2014, 2015 was when YouTube did their first really big algorithm change. I forget exactly when it was, but it was when they made the huge change from money, views equals money to time on channel equals money. That's like the really dumbed down version of it, but basically like that's how it used to be, is that like number of views equated into an amount of money that you would get, and then now it's like time spent on your channel equals money, because of the way they changed like the ad revenue and all that kind of shit. So like a lot of the guys that used to do videos for painting miniatures and stuff, it kind of killed their channels, and a lot of the people that used to do animation and stuff, it killed their channels, because if you don't have like at least like a 10-15 minute video and people, it doesn't get put into the algorithm for recommending to people, and if people don't spend like a good portion of time like staying on your channel and watching multiple videos to get like to see multiple types of ads, you're not going to really make any money anymore. Oh, you posted a link. Let me check out your link here. Oh, those look really good, man. Can I zoom in? No, I can't. But yeah, those are some good looking Death Shroud Terminators, man. If I would say anything, like any kind of just like positive criticism, I don't know if these are like done, but I would say like go ahead and clean up the rim of your bases and make sure those are like painted a solid black or like a really dark brown or something, whichever tickles your fancy. But I would definitely paint those rims. It looks like your basing is just like basing material straight up glued to the base, and I would say like always paint that. Don't ever leave it like unpainted. There's a pretty marked difference between somebody that just like glues sand to their base and somebody that glues sand to their base and then paints over that and then like gives it color contrast and everything else, because it looks more diegetic to the model, because you have like this painted model that's painted very like hyper realistically to look good on a tabletop, then you just have like real ass dirt on your base, and it throws everything out of whack. So you always want to paint the material you put on your base, no matter what. And otherwise, like your stuff's looking great. Like I would maybe like see about getting some more contrast into your golds, just because you have so much green on the models that since the armor plates don't have a whole lot of color separation, that the golds need to be a little bit more vibrant to catch the eye and give some contrast to your greens. But otherwise, it's looking really, really good, man. Oh, you're basing? Yeah. I mean, like, if you're careful, you can probably go back in there and get some paint over it, because, I mean, like, a lot of times with that base material stuff, you don't always have to primer it. I mean, I recommend that you would, but you don't always have to. And you can always just get some, like, Games Workshop texture paint and thin it down really good and just paint over it so it adds even more texture to everything. And then just, you know, like, give that a quick dry brush. But I mean, I don't want you to like go back and ruin your models, because I saw you put flocking on there, and like that's going to be really hard to paint around. I would just say for your next set of stuff, like if you want that thing on there, maybe like paint the models off the bases, kind of like how I'm doing here, where I've got him with like a pin and like a hole drilled in the base. You can just like glue him right in there, and then do all your like texture and flocking stuff, and you know, paint all of that, then put your flocking on, and then put your base, the model on the base afterwards. So that way it's not as hard. You don't have to paint around your model, because I know, like when you have a fully painted model, trying to get all that like texture paint or like basing stuff around the model without it like, you know, messing up the finished model, it can be kind of frustrating. Because I mean, like if you look at here's like some you know, kind of like sloppily painted Death Guard stuff that I did as a speed paint. And, you know, like for Death Guard, it doesn't really matter because if like you get dirt and grime and stuff on their feet, like that's not really a big deal. But just some simple like texture paint goes a long way to making your models look really good. Because Kenny says that a lot too. Like, no, don't have any unpainted materials on your models. Um, and I would agree with that sentiment wholeheartedly. Even for like windscreens and stuff like that, you could have like a beautifully painted, you know, like Space Marine flyer, and then you have that like, kind of like unpainted plastic canopy on there. And every time I see it, like no matter how well painted the vehicle is, that like bootsy plastic canopy just makes it look like a cheap GI Joe toy. Like I would always paint those. And if you want it to be transparent, what I would do is, like if I like say, okay, here's an example. Like if I got a commission, right? They wanted me to paint like a Space Marine flyer, and they wanted the canopy to be transparent. Probably what I would do is find some kind of tinted clear coat and tint that entire thing a color, and then matte coat it so that it has the same consistency of finish across the entire model, so it looks painted, but it's still translucent. That's probably the only way that I would do it. Otherwise, that like clear plastic stuff just looks bad. Yeah, I've used Tamiya stuff before. I'm a pretty big proponent of using Tamiya, and Mr. Hobby products. Gamer Dad, well, I kind of went back to the drawing. That's like the whole point of this little venture is I'm kind of going back to the drawing board on how to approach painting my Deathwing, because I'll show you. If we so here's one of our Deathwing guys, right? That we're still waiting for the wash to dry. You see how much like contrast there is on his armor? Like the shadows are really deep, rich, beastie brown, and the brights are that nice, smooth skeleton bone. And there's a color contrast. And we look at the Deathwing Knights that I painted, and all the colors look super washed out, and there's not really any contrast going on except for like in the deepest recesses. I was not satisfied with this product. Like I wanted mine to look better than this. So what I decided to do was just reapproach it and take a different like technique on airbrushing the bone colors, so that I could have those really cool highlights and shadows and color contrast, and it wouldn't look all washed out like this guy does. Like everything, like it looks like the exposure was set way too high on this guy, and that's not what I wanted out of my Deathwing. I wanted him to look really good. So we're kind of taking a different approach, and these guys will probably end up getting stripped. Because this kind of the same thing happened on Belial. When we painted Belial, like his armor is really, really bright, like bleached bone colored, and I had to go back into all these like really big shadow parts and just cut in beastie brown with a brush manually. And the shadows look all right now, but I would much rather him look like this with these kind of color transitions than with this kind of like bleached bone, really, really bright, almost no color contrast kind of a thing. So like I'm okay with Belial looking the way that he does. He looks fine. It's just far as like the look of the entire army. I wanted something different. I wanted him to look better. So we're kind of starting over a little bit, so that we have more we have more color contrast and stuff in our bone colors. And it doesn't. This time I didn't take it up through like ivory to a pure white and stuff like that. I just kind of left it at the skeleton bone, and then did a little bit of white highlights, like super, super targeted, teeny tiny bits of white on there, just to brighten those areas up before a wash, so that our stuff looked more bone and less ivory, like bleached ivory, super, clean, washed out. Are the cataphracti legs in the Deathwing? Yes. Yeah. I wanted my Deathwing Knights to specifically look a little bit different than the normal Deathwing Terminators. So you can see I just, with a little bit of clipping and cutting here and there, I was able to put the Deathwing Knight torsos on these guys, and it gives them a little bit more height in the torso. So it makes them look a little bit taller and more dynamic. And I don't want to just like never ever paint these guys. Like I don't want to throw them away. So I'm just gonna strip these guys and start over like we're doing right now. I just wanted to kind of take one model, focus on one model, and kind of go from there before I start doing whole squads again. No worries, Gamer Dad. You have a good time. What hotel did I get for Adepticon? I'm staying at the Doubletree. The Schaumburg Doubletree. It's like a 5-minute drive, maybe less, from the Renaissance. It's where I stayed last year. I tried a few places that were closer this time around, and those are all booked. So I was just like, well, they'll probably be open because it's a little bit farther away. So yeah, they were sounded like they had a lot of openings. So if you haven't booked already, you might want to consider staying at the Doubletree. That's where I'll be staying. I know Spec Ops is going to be there for the weekend, so he'll be staying with me for the days that he's there. I'm going to be there for the entire time. I think we're actually starting our drive on that Tuesday to get there on that Wednesday, because it's like a 17-hour drive, depending on traffic from here in Austin to Schaumburg. So we're probably going to leave like Tuesday afternoon, so that we can kind of show up when the rooms are ready to check in, because hotels don't really let you check in until like mid-afternoon. So that way we can maybe like catch a nap or just chill out before registration opens at 7. Oh, so you're across the street. Cool. Yeah. It's a cool little area. There's a restaurant over there by those hotels. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like a brewery slash bar and grill. So they have all their like really good microbrews, and we went there last year, and the beer there was like pretty primo. So I'll probably want to stop there again at least once during the stay. And we'll be driving this time, so it'll be a lot less wallet intensive than it was last year. Like, yeah, it was rough last year having to fly, then get a cab out to Schaumburg, and then get Ubers pretty much everywhere. Was really expensive. So being able to drive this time is going to be kind of a godsend. All right, fool, where you dry at? It's like this one spot. Where'd my there it is. Suck some of that up out of there. Place under his kind of get all that stuff dried out. I think he's dry other than those like 2 problem spots. So check our other pieces, y'all. Which I'm pretty sure are completely dry otherwise. There's some, kind of see like way deep down in there, that stuff is kind of wet, so that's fine because we're not going to touch that area. Just kind of let that stuff dry out a little bit more, because I do want to matte coat this guy before we get back to doing any brush painting on him, because the paint won't want to stick to that gloss coat. Our base is pretty much fine, and we don't need to matte coat it back, so I guess we can kind of work on it a little bit while we wait. What do we want to start off with for our greens? Rhyme sucks, man. Oh, I appreciate that, Sapper Steve. I know that Spec is going to be driving in as well, so I'm sure there will be no shortage of wheels. So probably want to go do something after the con each day. I know there's probably going to be some hanging out with people after each con, but that bar at the Renaissance fills up real fast. It's not very big, so we'll probably want to go find somewhere to hang out where there's maybe less people. And I think there's gonna be probably gonna do like a meetup party like last year, at least one of the nights. Got my t-shirts for Adepticon ordered those yesterday, so some of them are already like promised to people, but I think I'll have a handful of extras if you're quick on the draw and you find me. I'll give you a cool Adepticon 2018 Jacket Clubs t-shirt. Ground Liquor, thanks for that follow. Appreciate that follow. Don't think I've seen you around before, so feel free to say hey in the chat. We're a pretty friendly bunch here. I promise I don't get on my soapbox as much as I did today, all the time. Yeah, we'll have to see what the guys are gonna do. Because last year it was like in their hotel suite, and there was like way too many people in there. Like it ran out of room real fast. And since so many more people are showing up this year, I don't know. Maybe they'll change the venue or something. I'm not sure. Gonna have to wait till the day of. Oh, wow, that's a hell of a long drive. You going somewhere in like Eastern Europe or something? That's a long way. I don't even think there's no way England is that far across. Like the United States is like 3,000 miles across. Let that green dry up, and we'll throw a green wash on it so our greens look nice and vibrant. And I believe that should be enough time for this stuff to get matte coated, so let's bust out the airbrush. Oh, to Portugal. Yeah, that's going to be a ways, because you kind of have to go like down, like across, and then around and down to get to that point, because Portugal's on the western side, like the western tip of Spain. It's like a little sliver, right? If I remember my middle school geography. Thanks for stopping by, Warlander, man. Yeah. Well, that's a nice drive. I hear that driving through the French countryside is real pretty. I remember years ago there was a thing called the long way around, which was kind of a video logged documentary that Ewan McGregor and a friend of his did, where they drove their motorcycles eastward from England, going eastward to circumnavigate, and they drove like all the way across to the far eastern edge of Russia up in Siberia, and then caught a ferry over to Alaska, and then drove down through Alaska all the way across the country to New York. And I was like, man, I wish I could do that one day. I probably wouldn't go out. I probably wouldn't go into like Eastern Bloc out into Russia. That area wasn't very pretty. I mean, like if you're doing like cross country motorcycle riding, like yeah, that was probably a lot of fun. But as far as just like driving in the countryside, I'm like, I don't really feel like driving out to the steppes of Russia. Like that doesn't seem like very pretty country to me. But the whole western part of Europe is beautiful. I went over there when I was younger to let's see, where did I go? It was England, then straight to Sweden, and then we spent like a week in Sweden, and then we did kind of like a week-long kind of like tour around. So we went to like Germany, went to Italy, up through some parts of no. Yeah, I think it was just like Germany and Italy. Back to Sweden, and then when we left, we flew back to London, and we stayed in London for another couple of days. Did some sightseeing, caught a couple of plays, stuff like that before we went home. But I really liked Rome. Like Rome was cool. Germany was pretty nice. Stopped by Amsterdam for a day. That was pretty wild. Sweden was really nice. Mozzarella, thanks for that follow. Appreciate you. No. It was kind of like a family thing. I don't know if they still have it or not, but this was back in like 2003, I think 2003, 2004. My mom's dad, who was a football coach for his entire adult life, went over to Karlstad, Sweden, to be the interim head coach for the team they had for a European football league. And when I say football, I mean like American football like the NFL, but it was like a European league where they had all these cities in the European area that would have American style football teams. And he was the interim head coach of the Karlstad Crusaders to get their program up and running, so they knew the ins and outs. And you know, it's always better to have somebody who's been doing it his whole life in America rather than like somebody who's kind of an outsider do it. So he brought a bunch of guys who were getting to the end of their like college careers and probably weren't going to go pro to come over there and be like, let's see, I think he brought like a quarterback and a couple of running backs and some defensive guys to kind of be his like player coaches who were like they would play on the team for a couple of seasons and be kind of like the team captains and like leaders and stuff to get everybody in the right headspace. And he did that for like 2 or 3 seasons. And we went over there during one of the seasons to visit them during the season, saw some games, rode around on the tour bus, you know, that kind of thing. Oh, that's cool, Apophis. That'll probably be nice. Wolfsark, you bought some expensive brushes? What, did you buy some like Winsor Newtons or something? I mean, Games Workshop brushes could be considered expensive, but they're not very good. They sell for about the same price. Yeah. I just didn't know if the league was still around. Like, I kind of didn't really pay much attention to it after my granddad came back. So, I don't know. I'd be interested to know if it was still there or not. Winsor Newtons? Yeah, I love my Winsor Newtons. Alright. Now, where do we want to go from here? Probably need to block in some all our green stuff. So I think we can start there. So I'm going to get out our flat green for model color, and I want it to be darker than this. Like, this is kind of like a primary color green, right? So I'm going to put some on the palette, and then I'm going to get our model color black, and I'm just going to try to put like a little bit of black in there so that it doesn't completely phase out the green, and see if I can get this to kind of a black green as like a base coat for our emblems and our tabards. I have a really dark green called I think Castellan green or some such from Vallejo Game Air. But that green doesn't really have a whole lot of stick to it when it's being brush painted. So I'd rather just like mix up my own color for our base coats. So we're looking at something more like a little darker green. And I like doing my base coats with model color because it has really good stick. And I can thin it down really nice and thin. You know what? I don't know why I did that. If I'm just gonna like pick it up immediately, I don't want that to get on my hands. Okay. Gonna try to bring this in here really thin. It might take a couple of coats, but that's fine. Just to get a base coat for all of our stuff that's going to be green. And normally when I'm doing stuff like this, like if I was gonna get a like another base coat over a color, like so I'm painting this part of the tabard, right? And our little like chest eagle and like the hilt of this knife and stuff is gonna get painted a totally different color. Normally what I would do if I was gonna paint something to kind of like a tabletop up to a tournament standard, I would just kind of be careful where I needed to be careful and be sloppy where it didn't matter because I'm just going to paint over it. But since these guys are going to be more of kind of like a display standard, like I really want these to be kind of like my showcase to people at Adepticon, I'm just going to be extra careful everywhere, not putting any paint where it doesn't need to be so we can maintain like really thin coats on everything. Just to make sure that everything is going to look its absolute best. Bark. I don't know, man. Like, the Winsor Newton that I'm using right now, I bought from Amazon. And it most definitely did not take that long to get to me. You might have just been looking at a time where a lot of that stuff was maybe like out of stock to some of for the more like local sellers. So I would just look again because honestly, like that, if you hadn't looked before, my answer to you would have been to look on Amazon because that's where I bought mine. I don't know offhand anybody who sells Winsor Newton products. You might want to try Slow Fuse Gaming's website. He has a hobby web store. I think he sells Winsor Newton products, and he also has his own line of brushes that are really good. That he designed himself, and he's a very accomplished painter who's just an absolute wealth of knowledge. So he designed his brushes from the ground up to be specifically for painting miniatures. And I have a set, and they're pretty good. Definitely better than most of the companies out there, other than Winsor Newton. But if you're located in the US, he's probably a good bet for having them, or being able to order them without very long turnaround. Oh, you're just trying to get the Amazon Prime? I don't know. I mean, it... Honestly, man, I can't remember how long it took to get this brush. I've had it for over a year, so it may have taken a little while to get to me, but... maybe try Hobby Lobby or Michaels. I seem to remember them selling Winsor Newton product brushes. I don't know if it's the Series 7s or not, because I would recommend getting the Series 7s if you wanted to get paint miniatures with them. But I want to say Slow Fuse has them, or at least can order them for you. Let's pick this up real quick. That's all the green for this guy. Okay, let's get our base coat of green on there. And I think what I can do is probably get some airbrushing highlights onto these larger parts, like up near the peaks of these wingtip things, and kind of right here on our cloth stuff, without any overspray if I'm careful. Oop. I say as I drop my brush like an idiot. Before we block in the very light gray that we're going to use for our whites. I could probably go ahead and just like do some little airbrush highlights on there real quick, without too much trouble. Huh. How do I describe how I thin my paints? It's such a hard question. I'm not very good with that question because I like paints with a lot of stick to them, which means that I can just kind of put them on there like really thin, like I'm doing now, and they just kind of stick to the model without being like really thin. But I would say good enough to have like a nice flow to them. Like if I get my palette over here, like I have enough for it to kind of be liquidy enough to swirl all around and just kind of go down like that. But I thin different paint lines to different consistencies based on like how they react to being thinned with water, because I always want the most amount of stick that I can so that I'm not having to paint like 10-12 layers of a paint so thin that it, you know, takes forever. I like doing a solid base coat and then doing thin highlights, but I don't want to be here doing it all day. And I've never really I don't really have a system that people can just like apply to their own stuff. The way that I thin my paints is all like by feel. I guess I would say like to a consistency that would like slowly run down the side of a cup, if that makes sense. But not so thin that they would run if you like turned your palette to an angle. So like, because if I turn my palette like this, that paint's like, see how slow it's going? Like that's kind of what I mean. You don't want it to be so watery that it's just gonna like run and drip right off the palette. And then, you know, if it starts getting too thick, I can just add a little bit more water or whatever to refresh it. if thinning your paint to the right consistency is kind of a problem for you, I would recommend using a like a wet palette or a like a damp palette, something like that. I know that helps quite a few people. I use a wet palette sometimes. I'm kind of set in my ways when it comes to using different types of palettes. Like I prefer using my dry palette and just getting paint to the consistency that I want it. But for some projects, I will use a wet palette depending on what kind of highlights I want to be doing. Matter of factly, I might end up using a wet palette for these guys if I can't airbrush the highlights on all these greens. I think I can airbrush the highlights on most of these greens if I'm really careful. But on some of them, I might end up having to use a wet palette to get really soft transitions. It's kind of similar to the question that I get a lot, which is like, how do you know if your airbrush paint is thin to the right consistency, you know, to airbrush good? And that's always kind of a hard question to answer. Most people will give you kind of that generic answer of like the consistency of milk, which isn't always that helpful. Because you're like, how do you know if something is the consistency of milk when it's, you know, like not milk colored? And I kind of gave the same answer. Like when I thin my airbrush paints, I use a little, like a kind of like an old shitty brush to mix the paint and the flow improver together into the cup, and then I will draw the edge of my brush across the lip of the cup, kind of like this. And if the paint flows easily down the side of your airbrush cup, then that's probably a good enough consistency to airbrush with. But different paint colors and different paint brands behave differently once thinned. And so it's just like, it's kind of a learning curve that you just have to get used to. Especially when it comes to airbrushing, because like, if I want to airbrush something with like Citadel color, that paint behaves like really differently than like Vallejo paint. And Vallejo paint behaves differently than Army Painter paint. Because they're all different brands. They have a different chemical consistency. So like my kind of like system of painting is I will try to do base coats with model color like I'm doing now, because they give really good base coats. And then when I go to my highlights, I like switching to other paint brands. I'll still use Vallejo sometimes, especially if I'm going to use like game color. Because for my highlights, I want more like rich, vibrant, bright color pigment. Whereas model color is very like basic and muted, because model color was designed for like scale modeling, and like military models and figurines and stuff. So like you have like your flat green from Vallejo model color, and then you have like goblin green from Army Painter, which is a more vibrant green. It's like richer, and you can go even brighter from there, where you have like oh wait, that was green skin. This is goblin green, and then you have like scorpion green from Game Air, which is a really bright like neon green, stuff like that. Whereas another example is if you look at like model color yellow ochre, it's a very muted like military khaki tone, and then you have gold yellow from Game Air, which is a game color, so it's like fantasy yellow. It's very bright. It's a medium gold, but it's much more vibrant than the yellow ochre. I think I got all the green on this part of him. Let's see if I can get this. Little Dark Angel symbol. Yeah, like what kind of milk? Like that's it was funny because like when I started learning how to airbrush, I never heard that. I never heard that as a metric for how to thin your paints for airbrushing. And admittedly, that might just be because like the only resources I was using to learn how to airbrush was Lester Bursley and By Painted, and literally in every one of their videos for doing their airbrush paints, they had like specific ratios of like paint to airbrush thinner or like paint to medium and things like that. So I never really heard like how to do it from scratch. Like, how do I take this color and get it ready for airbrushing? And most people would be like, well, you add airbrush thinner or water or medium. Some people used to use Windex back in the day, which I never understood. And they'd be like, you want the consistency of milk? I'm like, where did that come from? Because I never heard that. Actually, the first time I think I heard that was, um, I was watching a tested video from Adam Savage a couple of years ago where he was painting a like a resin, like 1/72nd scale garage kit, and he was using an airbrush on it, and that's what he said. I think that was the first time I had heard it, but I know that other people have been hearing that for years, from lots of different sources. So I don't know. Because I know that like when I heard that and I would see other people ask that question on like forums and stuff, and people would just say, oh, you want the consistency of milk. I always found that to be like a little dickish, because that's kind of like the throwaway answer. And even if somebody said that, you would still need to go and like you would need to do more research to figure out like, okay, what is the liquid consistency of milk so that I know what that even means. So when people ask me, that's the analogy that I use, is you just like you mix it up and then you draw your loaded brush full of liquid across the edge of the airbrush pot, and if it flows down the side freely, you're probably in the right place. I'll take it. This one is a regular. This is the Series 7. I think they're sold as Series 7 watercolor, not Series 7 miniature. The miniature types of brushes have shorter bristles on them. Because I have a Winsor Newton Series 7. This is a 00. I have a miniatures type from them that's also a 00, and I'm not a big fan of it. I like the longer bristles. That might just be because I'm really used to it. Because people say that like the miniature brushes with the shorter bristles give you more control. Which might be the case, but I think I'm just too used to using like these types. And so I always feel like I have more control with the longer bristle brushes than I do with the shorter ones. And I've been trying to use my hold on. Been trying to use my bomb wicks from Slow Fuse more because I'm not used to them. His are miniature style brushes that have the shorter bristles, and I can tell they're high quality brushes, but they always feel weird to me when I use them because they have those shorter bristles and I'm not used to them. So I need to use them more and get accustomed to it. green symbol on there. And I think that is all of the green that we're going to do, because this guy doesn't have a power fist. Yeah, sort of a halfway thing, yeah. And I mean, like, they are quality. I'm not going to say they're not quality, because I do think they are quality. There's just elements to them that I am not used to, and so they feel weird to me. Until I get used to them, I'm probably going to keep saying that, because... like, you don't get bristles as long as my Winsor Newton until you get into the much bigger sizes, like a 2. So you can see that, like, they're about... Oop, his is, like, that one's longer. But then if I bring it on back to... where's the detail one? Double zero. So here's the 00. And you can see that... See how short the 00 for the bomb wicks are compared to this one. I prefer the a little bit more bend to the bristles because they're longer. But these are good quality Klinsky Sable brushes. The handles are also longer than I'm used to. So if I line up the ferrules together, like his are like a full like 1.25 inches longer than my Winsor Newtons are, so that's taken some getting used to as well. But they're good brushes. I appreciate a good product when I see it. Yeah, like I have a Trip Zero miniature. And you can see like the bristles on that are like short as fuck. And I don't even like this one. This is a Winsor Newton Series 7 too. I prefer my other 777 with the long bristles for stuff like that. And if I'm doing like really fine detail, like edge highlighting stuff, I prefer a rigger that has like really long skinny bristles. Like this is my go-to for doing like really teeny tiny details and doing like really clean like edge highlights using the side of the brush. I like using this rigger brush from The Artisan that I got from Kenny. The only thing that I don't like about these is they're synthetic. And I'm not a huge fan of synthetic brushes, but I use the shit out of that rigger brush. It's great. So, in our last little bit of stuff, let's see, what do I need to do? I need to find my green wash. So I'm pretty sure I have some... I thought for sure I had Biltan green around here somewhere. That's Camo Shade. Ragnar Twitch, thanks for following. Appreciate that. What is this? That's Waywatcher green. I don't want that. I could have sworn that I had Biltan green. Well, I knew I had it. Get our Biltan green out and I do still use the Citadel washes quite a bit, purely because they're so quick and simple. I think the Army Painter washes are just objectively better, but I always have to like mix them with that quick shade wash medium to get the effect that I want. Whereas when I'm just like, I need to wash 6 little leaves, you just pop open your Citadel wash thing and go right to town with it. And I'm gonna have to be really careful with this stuff because I want to get a good wash, but I don't want this wash flowing over into places and tinting our bone color. So I have to be real careful. So I just want to get a little bit of wash on here, let that dry, so that when we come back tomorrow, we can do some quick like airbrush highlights on these. Hold this upside down. Oops, sorry if I'm holding that up. I kind of have this at a weird angle. And for our little emblem, I'm going to use trying to find my Nuln Oil gloss. There it is. I'm going to use our Nuln Oil gloss on this emblem because I want to do kind of like a little, just like a little pin wash around the edges of it, and I don't want it to like be running all over the place on this shoulder pad. clean our brushes out, because that is... Oh, we got 10 minutes. Okay. What do we want to do? What do we have time for in 10 minutes? So we could block in that little angel. Let's do that real quick. Get out our black metal. We'll do the terminatus symbol and the little angel on his shin guard there. That'll take us not very long. Nice clean terminatus symbol. Let's go ahead and do our little dark angel. Gonna end up giving him some black robes, but the rest of the model is gonna be metallic. Okay. That blocked in there. Okay. Just gonna hold it there. So that is about all of the time we're going to have today. So we're just out of time. Started blocking in these little metallic bits like that kind of cybernetic eye, Crux Terminatus, little angel on his shin guard there, the little camera. So tomorrow when we come back, we'll do some little airbrush highlights on these green parts. Just be really careful. Might need some masking tape or something. Nothing too bad. Just to get some nice like vibrant highlights on there. And then we'll have to do the same thing by hand on our green Dark Angels logo, just so that the transitions are soft like that. And then we'll start blocking in all the other colors, like finish blocking in all of our metallics. We'll do all of our joint pieces in like a really dark black, so it'll look like black rubber. We'll have to start blocking in our, we'll like paint the base for our feathers. And then we can probably airbrush the highlights on these if we're really careful. Those will look really nice. And then from there, it's just all like little detail highlights to edge highlights, and then he'll be done. So we're just gonna keep trucking with him tomorrow. The Lucid Soup. Thanks for following. Appreciate that. Spam text, what's up? How's it going? Malinkai, how will you glue them together considering the contact points are painted now? It's really easy, just scrape them. I can do that right now if I wanted to. since really the only place I'll ever need to actually put glue is on these little pegs, since these happen to be the ones from Dark Vengeance. You can just take the back side of your knife here and just scrape some of that paint off, just to show some plastic. I mean, it doesn't have to be like anything too much, just any plastic to plastic contact will be fine. And if you look on the back of our arm here, if I were to take all that sticky tack out, that'll be bare plastic. So, because the sticky tack protected the plastic from getting primed, so it'll glue up really nicely. On models that have like they would have just like an atrocious like seam line, I either don't paint those in sub-assemblies, or I am very careful in scraping the paint and using the plastic glue and just glue them together like that. And if I need to like kind of cover it up with a little bit of extra paint, I can do that. If not, then it's fine. With this guy, I'm pretty sure that the way he assembles, there's no seam lines anywhere between like folds of cloth or anything like that where you'd really notice it, so I think we'll be fine. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's a valid question, man. I do quite a bit of stuff in sub-assemblies. And most of the time I just try to hide them as best I can. Normally the only thing that really forces me to not want to do that is if the model will have some kind of like seam line where cloth is, like a cape or something like that. That's usually where it's the most noticeable. If it's like two pieces of like hard metal or something like butted up next to each other, that's fine, because like that can just be like a panel line that you can put a wash in. It just adds detail. A good example was this Lord of Contagion. And the way this model is assembled is there is a seam line that runs directly across these three folds of cloth on his shoulders both ways. And I just did not feel comfortable painting those two pieces in sub-assemblies, so I made sure to plastic glue it so it looked like a seamless piece of cloth. The new Cypher model was the same way. I would have preferred to do him in a lot of sub-assemblies, but his shoulders had that seam line going directly across the top of him that you just really needed to plastic glue together to make homogeneous. I think the way these Dark Vengeance Terminators go together, though, there's really almost no seam lines anywhere, so they're pretty nice for that. And then like for these guys, I just decided that I could paint them all in one piece, but I'll be redoing those because you can see the huge difference in like the contrast of the armor colors. That I just like this way better. So I'll probably end up stripping these guys and starting over once I have the details knocked out of how I want to get through the entire process. Gam25, hello. Sorry, you're just now checking in. We're about to get out of here. We will be on tomorrow from 5 to 8. That's my stream time for Saturday and Sundays, 5 to 8 p.m. US Central Time. So if you want to come back and see this guy get finished, we'll probably end up finishing him tomorrow during the stream. So come by and check that out. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way, Ragnar. Like, I really like when models are really easy to put together, because that's just time that I hate spending on stuff. It's also why I love the old metal models that are just one piece. Alright, so I think right now we're just waiting on... Oh yeah, man. I know it's hard for you European guys because this time slot's kind of like is not very good hours for you. But you can definitely watch the stream again, because as soon as I go offline, it'll archive the stream to the videos section of the channel, so you can see me paint all of this stuff. Let's see. I'm gonna exit out. Okay, key lime's on. Cool. All right. All right. Cool. All right. Well, like I said, that's it for today. We're gonna be back tomorrow, same time, working on this Dark Angel dude. Hopefully, we'll be able to get through everything pretty fast, get him finished, put on his base, and be able to like have that kind of step-by-step recipe ready to go for the rest of the Deathwing that I need to paint. Anything else? Anything else? I think that's about it. If you haven't checked out the YouTube page, we do have a YouTube page now where I'm archiving all of the past streams, so you can go check those out. There's not too much stuff up there yet, because I only started doing that a couple weeks ago, but I do have some other Deathwing videos, some Mordians that I've painted. We also have like our first studio tutorial of how to paint Codex Dark Angels. That's up there. It's a little long, but I wanted to do a start to finish tutorial. And there's going to be more studio tutorials coming in the future. They're going to be more bite-sized, so look forward to that. I think that's about it for today. Gonna go throw a host over to Keyline Prime. He's just now starting up, so like normal, wait for the host to go through, then jump on over to his channel, tell him I sent you, spam with those Jack Clubs emotes if you got them. I really appreciate all the new faces coming in today. Make sure you come back tomorrow to see the model get finished. And I will see you guys then.